Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives, and welcome to a Thursday evening chat, our chat number 4 with the author AW Finnegan, the author of The Sleeper Agent, The Rise of Lyme Disease, Chronic Illness, and the Great Imitator Antigens of Biological Warfare. It is a real tour de force of a book. I've been reading it chapter by chapter on my show. And invite you to catch up with our audio version of it on our podcasts, which you can find at McDuff Lives on any of the major podcast services, Apple, Spotify, iHeart, etc. So we are really trying to get the word out about this book because I think this book can open the key to understanding a lot of the chronic disease that we're facing in this country, including cancer, which is a personal issue of mine, as well as that of thousands and millions of other people around the world as the cancer rates are skyrocketing. So does it all come down to manipulation of our biology by sleeper agents like Eric Traub? Well, I don't know about all of it, but I think we can certainly attribute a great deal of it to the work of Eric Traub as the sleeper agent and the person who conveys those sleeper agents into our blood, into our lives. It's an amazing book. I am very grateful once again to you, Adam, for joining me for our discussion tonight. So let's get started. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. It's great to be back. I love talking to you on this show, and whatever you'd like to discuss, I'm all up for it.
Well, I've been, just right now, I've just finished reading chapter 10 of your book, which is the description of Eric Traub as the sleeper agent, and a sleeper in the ranks is the name of that chapter. But without a person named Donald McLean, I don't think any of this would have been possible. And Donald McLean is, of course, one of the famous and infamous Cambridge Five, the Cambridge spies, that included Kim Philby, the famous, and then more recently found out Lord Rothschild, Lord Victor Rothschild. So these people are very, very connected to deep money in the British financial system in the city of London, and the powers that be in the British Empire, whether it's still an empire, I think probably many people would say it is, but that ancient empire that has been ruling the seas as well as a lot of the rest of the world for the past 250 or more years, it seems to be that the British influence has been a part of the invasion, even though it was a Soviet program facilitated, as I think you and I have been discussing, by members of the British Secret Service. And that's a very difficult concept for people to accept. I mean, we're the West, right? We're the good guys.
Yeah. And, the setup of the Soviet Union, had a lot to do with Britain. Britain had a lot to do with the setup of the Soviet Union, rather.
Yeah, that's true. And people don't recognize that either. But part of the work that we've been doing here at McDuff Lives has been just digging into the Wall Street connections, and you're probably quite familiar with that through talking to Loftus and others about the
and Richard B. Spence, he wrote that book Wall Street and the Russian Revolution, which was kind of like Anthony Sutton's Wall Street and there was Wall Street. There was one by Anthony Sutton, but there was one of a similar name by my friend, Professor Emeritus Richard B. Spence. But yeah, and of course I talked about that guy, Lieutenant Dorian Blair, in the beginning of my book, and he wrote a book about his time in Russia as a Secret Service agent. He was working for Russian intelligence as a British intelligence person as well. So there was a lot of involvement in the setup of the Soviet Union with British intelligence.
Yes, and that is part of the unspoken history that we're trying to make more current, more commonly known as people. You have to have some background in order to accept that these sleeper agent activities really happened. That's why it's very valuable that before chapter 1 you did a preliminary discussion. I read it as part 1 of my readings, but it's the 5 angles of biological warfare, and you have to realize that it takes a certain mindset to even accept the idea that this would happen. And American people don't have that mindset. We don't want to think about it. So this book is going to be a hard thing to swallow, but if we want to save our country, we have to. It's an essential book.
Yeah, and it certainly is not just Eric Traub that brought this. It was like he was just somebody kind of like moving as a pawn almost, if you could. I mean, in the larger picture, it's like these global superpowers and their moves and their chess moves, so to speak. Kind of, he just became like one of these. He was just very intelligent, and this higher intelligence that he had was able to kind of utilize, or the powers that be were able to utilize, because he worked for several different superpowers.
Yeah, these scientists, whether they are the evil scientists or good scientists, they still represent a power, a certain kind of power that people are going to want to control. And in the context of war, and the 20th century has mostly been war. In that context, it is quite common to snatch up an expert and then put him to work for your side. What the heck could an expert do about it?
Yeah, and they were willing to overlook atrocities committed by people like, if you look at like the Unit 731 guys, like the leader of Unit 731, like he was given a free pass for all of those atrocities, and that Unit 731 program was atrocity. Some of the things that they did, and that it's just beyond human comprehension what they did to people.
Well, you hear the same thing though about the Inquisition, about the Ivan the Terrible and Dracula and all, this absolute power, that corrupts absolutely has been part of humanity. One of your quotes is so appropriate. I think I can remember it at the top of one of your chapters about what is it to really test a man's character, give him power.
Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, Abraham Lincoln, and that idea that I grew up with, I imagine most people did, that you're supposed to have good character. There is this thing called character, and it goes along with the golden rule and just a general sense of what's good for humanity. And even though you may have grown up that way, forces can come into your life that are so powerful that you find yourself going down the other way. And it happens over and over again. And I'm afraid that that's one of the big problems with humanity is how can we, if you did have a brain of an Eric Traub that could figure all this stuff out, how could you say no when the Joseph Stalin is telling you to do it? I don't think that there's an option, at least if you want to keep your head on your shoulders.
Yeah. And that's what I said in the book was kind of like a dialogue between them with the powers that be for Stalin and Traub, was that if he wants to keep living the Western lifestyle, he's going to have to make up his mind. And what's his best interest? Does he do as they say and go over to the West as a KGB guy, or does he refuse and then get sent to Nuremberg?
And then, getting back to the who's behind it all question is that when the Berlin Wall falls, the Soviet Union falls, and yet, as far as I can tell, these programs were not exposed. The Brzezinski, Reagan, all of the American leaders that took credit for the fall of the Soviet Union, certainly within the knowledge of CIA and other American intelligence agencies and military intelligence, they knew about these programs. Mm-hmm. They could have blamed it on the Soviets and shut them all down, but they didn't. So now we're looking at Russia with the same attitude as we used to look at the Soviet Union. Our country now says, well, yeah, we took apart the Soviet Union, but unfortunately the Ruskies have turned bad again, and they're now once again just as bad as the Soviets ever were, and they're trying to take over Europe, and they're trying to take over the whole world, and the whole Cold War rhetoric didn't go away. Neither did the sleeper agents, and that is another thing that just tells you that this is not like national interest actors that are doing this. These are criminals behind the scenes that are manipulating and profiting from horrific acts and sharing poisons that are stealthy, hard to track, almost impossible to treat in some cases, and continue to debilitate not only our population but our national economy and our ability to stay as a sovereign nation.
Yeah,
it's a huge problem. So now one way that everybody can latch on to this is the Lyme disease connection, and you have set forth in great detail the different what is it, the Anserina, the Galenicum, the different I guess bacteria that are so close to the Lyme disease that it's your proposition that Lyme disease itself is the result of this stealth bioweapon agency. Could you just give us more details and explain to people that haven't read the book yet why you feel so strongly that you've found the source of Lyme disease?
Sure. So it was like a cocktail of different pathogens that were kind of all put into these ticks, and it was all the same pathogens that he's learning about in 1939. And we know that the Lyme disease spirochete is from that Borrelia anserina. It's the closest relative, the Borrelia anserina being a parent strain, which gave rise to these outgroups, these siblings, like Borrelia afzelii is one of the early. So there's 3 strains that are considered Lyme disease. It's Borrelia burgdorferi, Borrelia guerini, and Borrelia afzelii. And Borrelia guerini and afzelii were the ones common in Germany and Europe. But then there's Borrelia burgdorferi, which that also was in Germany and Europe, but there's differences between the the American strains and the German strains. But basically, it also comes with a bunch of other co-infections called like rickettsia. There's different strains of rickettsia. There's also the blood parasites like Babesia. There's also Bartonella, and there's also human monocytic ehrlichiosis, and there's also human granulocytic ehrlichiosis. Actually, that might be human granulocytic anaplasmosis now. But all of these mix, this entire cocktail of infections was used. So this would confuse diagnosis. This would confuse diagnosis, and it would also send the immune system into a tailspin and bring on this same immune tolerance that Eric Traub spent his entire life studying. And we have him with the spirochetes in 1939, the same year that he's learning from his mentor Carl Beller about how complicated a disease it is when you have these mix of infections. And he named all the same co-infections aside from this leishmaniasis, which is a parasite. But so instead of that, he had the Borrelia anserina, and the Borrelia spirochetes are almost like parasites. They were at one time considered parasitic spirochetes, but now they're classed as bacteria. But they are probably almost more like parasites. But so you've got this whole mix of infections that was seen in this dog that his mentor Carl Beller was talking about. Okay, there's this very complicated disease that's seen in a dog with these mix of infections. And so we have him with all of that foreknowledge. We have him with those spirochetes. And then if you look at the path that Lyme disease takes, and well, Lyme disease and its co-infections, you have first, it's over in Germany, right? Where all this is in Eastern Europe, because the Nazis were kind of using these weapons in the war and on Russia too. So they were doing it over Russian territory, but they were also doing it in Eastern Europe and over Europe. And then later on, it seems to appear in the United States. It could have been as early as just after 1945, but at least in the time that he comes back to the U.S. So it seems to follow everywhere he goes. In 1946, the black-legged tick, and so the black-legged tick is the main tick that spreads this. In 1946, the black-legged tick was not a known transmitter of any disease. Then in the 1950s, it starts to be named as a serious transmitter of disease. And so even in like 1951, they were still saying it's not a known transmitter of human diseases, but it's a serious human pest. And what we know is that the USDA started collecting them off animals in annual surveys, and when they started these biological warfare experiments, especially with using the ticks and what were supposed to be harmless tracers in the ticks attached to shorebirds, they started using the black-legged tick because the government said, well, they're not a known transmitter of any disease. But then so they started doing that, and that's, you have the sources who were in Lab 257 saying that Traub was there and he's releasing them on these shorebirds. And then what John Loftus and his sources have said was the same thing. And so the birds start carrying it all over the United States. And now he's also going back and forth between Colombia and the United States. And he's doing it in the same pattern as the birds. And so it also establishes itself in South America. But then also the birds start carrying it all over the planet, but it had already established itself in Germany and then in the United States. And so it looks like it was updated several times. So there's several circulating strains, which would be consistent with all of this activity. And all of these co-infections start to become a serious problem. All of those ones that he learned about in 1939 start to become a serious problem. And we know that the U.S. Navy started looking into Borrelia anserina, and then so after that, after Traub was interrogated, right, and he's sent back to Germany, they start having these USDA conferences about bioterrorism on the poultry industry. And it was the only time that they name avian spirochetosis, which is Borrelia anserina. They name that as one of the agents that they were concerned about, and for perhaps the only time on record. After that, there's a complete blackout on avian spirochetosis, aside from a few papers that were published in the scientific arena. But as far as the USDA, complete blackout. And so for Plum Island, it's suspicious in itself that they weren't researching Lyme disease, because their job was to research foreign animal diseases with zoonotic potential. So that in itself was entirely Plum Island's domain. But yet you don't see any research on Borrelia anserina or Lyme disease all the way up into the, all the way to 2000, the year 2000. And so I'm thinking this is because it's seriously classified, or because it was kind of off limits to Plum Island because of that blunder, right? Kind of like when you have a cover up, you want to exclude the people responsible, right? Just like I said, if Bergdorfer had been responsible, he wouldn't be the guy discovering it. Like when in 1983, when he discovered the spirochete, even though he had probably discovered it a long while back in a classified setting, he would not be the guy, because it goes against the nature of a cover-up, right? You don't want it's like you compartmentalize them, right? From the cover-up, you compartmentalize the people responsible from the issue. It's like Plum Island should have been all over Lyme disease. They should have been looking at it from the very beginning. If it wasn't a big blunder that happened, if it wasn't what I'm saying. And
if you're saying blunder, it reminds me of a couple of very useful acronyms I picked up: LIHOP and MIHOP. LIHOP is let it happen on purpose. And MIHOP is made it happen on purpose.
Yeah. So when I say blunder, I'm more or less talking about the U.S. government being stupid enough to bring him over here, and for the most part, like a lot of people that were involved probably didn't even realize they were involved. Like the guys at Plum Island that were releasing these shorebirds may not have known, but certainly he did. But it wasn't so much a blunder, but an intentional act of bioterrorism.
So the government made a blunder, but the people that released it were intentional.
Well, at least for Eric Traub, it was intentional, but it may have been like the people that were releasing it on Plum Island may have been as ignorant as everybody else. But Traub was clearly running circles around them, and I guess that he told them according to what John's sources had said, is that told them that, oh yeah, it produces a bullseye rash, but it's harmless. Right. And that's how, because the Nazis also tracked it from the bullseye rash. They, like in Africa. But he knew that it wasn't harmless.
Yes. Okay. But in terms of the biology of it, would you say that the connection of these Borrelias is clear enough to say that it's a smoking gun, that this was the Eric Traub weaponization project's fruit?
Well, I mean, my argument relies on a lot of circumstantial evidence. Sure. So it's like, but it's enough to put forward a very cohesive story that would be a smoking gun, as it would be as reliable as a smoking gun, documents that said this, and this. And it's called Mosaic Intelligence, where everything lines up. There are no contradictions. And, but that Borrelia Anserina thing is a very big deal. Because we have him with that, and it was 1939. He gets it. He has his student get it, and now this is the same year that, of course, he's researching, or where he gets his expertise on these tick-borne diseases, and of course that mix of infections that were the same co-infections that would later be in Lyme disease.
I wanted to get back to the question of parasites and bacteria. What, just for me as a non-biologist, what is the difference between a parasite and just a bacteria generally?
Well, the parasites are like more complex life forms. I mean, there's everything from the helminths, which are like worms. And I believe a lot of parasites, I don't really remember what the exact difference was. All I remember is that I forget what is the distinction between the bacteria and the parasites. But I remember that at one point, spirochetes were almost considered to be in their own group, that they were kind of like in halfway between parasite and bacteria. And I actually have a book on it called The Biology of the Parasitic Spirochetes. But I'm thinking they class them as bacteria because I'm not so sure that parasites have bacteriophages. Bacteriophages are those little viruses that land on bacteria and able to destroy them, or they can inject material into them that they assimilate and changes their genetics. But I know that the spirochetes do have bacteriophages, and I'm guessing that's why they probably classed them as bacteria. Bacteria are like usually, you have the rod-shaped bacteria, like E. coli. Then you have the cocci, which are like small clusters or grape-like, I think.
Yeah.
And the parasites are like, I believe, are more complex life forms. They're more like worms, and even though they're microscopic, the bacteria are much simpler than the parasites.
Well, to say the word parasite implies that this organism is feeding off of another organism, and that bacteria don't actually have to be parasites, but perhaps parasites have to be some form of bacteria or combination. But
yeah,
not being an expert myself, I'm going to try to step away from that before I say something that's not correct, because what I really think that I wanted to get to with regard to the point of parasites is this. It struck me this morning as I woke up that I, on a daily basis, am taking medications that are directed at animals. For instance, an antiparasitical called fenbendazole,
Mm-hmm.
another one called ivermectin. One of them is for dogs and the other one is for horses. But the reason that I'm taking them is because there is a ton of anecdotal evidence without, proper studies that these are actually cancer tumor suppressors. And
Yeah.
that there are many people out there that are saying things like cancer is a parasite, or at least that there is a parasite problem associated with cancer. And honestly, I've been taking these for let's say 7 months now, and as far as I can tell, they don't do any harm.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't hurt me in any way, and I've been enjoying a period of really good health. I feel excellent with a great deal of hope that I didn't have 7 months ago before I knew about these antiparasiticals. So, is it not interesting that now we're finding out that these concocted stealth diseases are in fact put together out of animal diseases?
Yeah.
And that, there must be more than just the two antiparasiticals I've named that could help people. If we identify that, this virus comes from a chicken and the chicken disease is treated this way with a certain drug in chickens, that might actually be the same type of a metaphor for what I'm doing with the cancer. Antiparasiticals as a way to address Lyme disease, as a way to address other chronic problems that people have, and also cancer. I don't know if you've studied any of that, but isn't it not interesting that you have a weaponization of diseases from animal materials, and now at least some of us are finding relief through using medications that are concocted for treating animals.
Yeah, and I was gonna say is it's interesting because they often always kind of describe viruses as well as like parasitic, and Traub often said things like perfect parasitism of the body by virus. And that's funny because people also would take things like ivermectin for viral things. You know what I mean? Like you had the SARS coronavirus 2 thing. And so ivermectin, people are having success with in viruses too. And of course, there's the cancer connection to viruses, but also there was a parasite called Trichinella spiralis that could also shed LCM virus and actually infect humans with a virus by having a parasitic infection. So that's another interesting parallel. So killing off, if supposedly, I mean, we don't really know what's going on in the person, but if the person is killing off parasites that are also that were shedding certain pathogenic viruses as well, that might be another thing, obviously. And so if you're, because there's definitely a link between cancer and viruses. That's been established. I mean, it's not the only thing that causes cancer. It's like I said, there's chemically induced cancer, there's radiologically induced cancer, and there's virus induced cancer. And so that is interesting. And I was actually looking into that whole fenbendazole thing and stuff. And I was actually going to ask you, like, oh, where do you get that? Because I might want to I might want to try it out someday, but we'll get into that another time. But
Well, I can tell you where you get it. It's a little pharmaceutical company called Merck.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Everything comes full circle, you know.
yeah. But I know I saw that there are a lot of people who are having success with cancer with some of those.
Yeah.
And I know that I was on an antifungal at one point and it made me feel better. But that was I forget what fluconazole, I think it was. And it is said that the fluconazole can destroy so there's when Lyme disease spirochetes are under attack, they break into these little cysts, these small, like they split apart in a million pieces into these little cysts. So they call it cyst forms. And it said that those antifungals can work on those cyst forms. But yeah, so but it was interesting that there was like this the word parasite was also being used for viruses and the actual parasites.
Yes, and then there's so much, you know. I mean, volumes and volumes of arguments back and forth over, you know, is a virus alive? What is a virus? Is there?
Yeah, and I've been kind of like forced. I'm forced to address it because of my book has a lot to do with viruses. But there was a really interesting paper by a guy named Eckhard Wimmer where he put together poliovirus as a chemical. He used a chemical formula to put this thing together. And he got the thing to act exactly like poliovirus in cell-free extracts of blood, I think it was. And so it can't be written off as an exosome because there weren't any cells in it. But he was able to use this formula to create, and it would duplicate and create a lot more virus. And so he said in that paper, he gave an excellent description. He says, when I am asked whether a virus is living or non-living, he says, yes, outside of the host, it's as dead as a ping pong ball. But in the host, it actually acts, it is alive. And he said, one could even say that it undergoes sexual reproduction. And he put this really interesting thing together, and he kind of was saying that, yeah, I know what I'm saying will go against what a lot of my peers think, but and I think that for me really that was one of the papers that I often cite because I do take the existence of viruses as a real thing. I do think they're proven, and it all started when they started passing material through filters that would hold back bacteria, stuff that was too small. And so they'd get the filtrates, and then they'd infect, or they'd test it out on like a farm animal, and they'd still get sick. And say, okay, it's obviously not a bacteria. It's something that is much, much smaller. And that's where the entire start of virus research began, was after these filters were used, and they'd put these filtrates through, and me and Matthew Raymer have been working on this, working on putting something together to kind of tell the story, because I just think like books like The Contagion Myth don't really give you an accurate picture, and he had a lot of things wrong as well. But a lot of people have taken that and said, "Oh, viruses don't exist anymore," and I don't adhere to that myself. But I'm kind of forced to address that often, even though it's become this very kind of like the SARS thing. You know what I mean? It's become a very heated debate.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't profit from that either.
Yeah.
It's yeah, but what you've done, there's not any debate going on about the content of your book. I'm expecting people to start citing you as a forensic witness in trials. I think the as you say, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, but nevertheless, you should be able to get to a jury with this.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. It's. I used the same criteria you would use in a court of law, right? You've got witnesses like John Loftus and the testimony that he had and what his sources have had to say.
Yeah.
What he said was that mosaic intelligence, that's what they call it in like intelligence gathering, mosaic intelligence, it's like circumstantial evidence, but it's a whole bunch of it from different sources, different official sources. And what he told me was that it's even more reliable than a smoking gun on one piece of paper. You know, and basically, I think it's definitely solid. And not only I made Lyme disease kind of like the apex of it, because that's kind of like what Traub's known for, and I'm able to show here it is. But it's also so much more than that, because then you've got this whole cancer thing, because he was able to raise the cancer rate to 50%. You'll see in chapter 15 what I'm talking about when you get there. He was able to raise
our population is getting there. I mean, we're just about to 50%.
Cancer is exploding. I think they said something like it's gone up like over 300%. Like in the last few years, it's just continuing to climb. But also, it also shows the big dent that his research puts in the entire antibody theory of vaccines and immunity. Like, it shows how flawed our immunity is. That inflammation may not be the cause of all disease, because a lot of these diseases happen in what looks like the total absence of inflammation. And then secondly, antibodies are not the determinant of immunity and they're not reliable biomarkers that someone has a certain disease, because you can have, like Traub's LCM virus. It showed that a lot of mice are crawling with virus, but they don't have any detectable antibodies, right? And when you go to get tested for things nowadays, what do? They look for antibodies. I mean, now they're starting to actually look through tissues and stuff, but a lot of times what they do is just have antibody tests, and if you don't have those antibodies, they say you're not sick. And it's kind of funny, because when you do have those antibodies, it's like, okay, you're sick. But then if they inject you to produce those antibodies, then they say you're immune, right? And a lot of the research that I've been doing shows that antibodies aren't really the driver of immunity. They seem to be some kind of backup by the immune system when you're being overloaded with toxins. And so there's just so much other stuff. Like,
let's do LCM virus.
Yeah.
Let's spend a couple of minutes while we have a little time left, because we've spent a good time on Lyme disease, but the LCM virus keeps coming up in your book. It's I'm not going to try to remember the how to spell it.
Lymphocytic choriomeningitis virus is what it is. Yeah.
And when you say lymphocytic, that's like the lymph system, right?
Yeah, and it does go to the lymph nodes, and I believe that's why they call it lymphocytic choriomeningitis, and it has to do with the part of the brain that is developed first in the womb. I forget the chorioplexus or something like that. Okay. I think it was called. So yes, and LCM virus is a good thing to cover, because it's kind of building off this whole Lyme disease thing, and I'll tell you why in a second. But if you want to continue what you were saying.
No, I want you to just explain,
Okay.
in a couple of minutes, if you can.
Yes.
Just start from the basic idea of LCM virus, and what did Eric Traub do with it?
Yeah. So he discovered, and so LCM virus is much like the 8 human herpes viruses, or like Epstein-Barr virus, those viruses that can be reactivated into active form. So he found that there was a latent virus in mice, and he found this he injected the mice intracranially with sterile bouillon, which contains foreign antigens, or you could say that it's very similar to an antigen, being that it's composed of a lot of lipids, and you shouldn't really inject lipids like that. But so he injects the mice in their brain. If they're called intracranial inoculations, it causes like a septic shock, and then the mice get sick. Now these mice would get sick, and then they would start shedding this virus that had been reactivated from the inside. And this was the LCM virus, lymphocytic chorea meningitis, and would start spreading to all the other mice. And he basically started an epidemic from scratch. And it's interesting because it's not unlike when somebody gets an injection, a vaccine. The same can also happen. You can reactivate viruses from within yourself after an injection with these lipids that they're injecting into people, and those start shedding to infect other people. He started this epidemic, and it actually infected some lab workers, humans, as well when he did this. But he basically started this outbreak, and he observed the infected colonies for the entire time he was at Rockefeller Institute. And he observed how it caused this phenomenon that we term immune tolerance, which is only another term for chronic immune deficiency. And they would harbor the virus continuously. They would have relapsing and remitting phases of the disease. It would just constantly relapse, remit, relapse, remit, relapse, remit. And that's one of the hallmarks of Lyme disease as well, and any chronic disease. But so another thing he noticed was that this virus would also, if there was an immune tolerant mother, she would always infect her progeny. Every mouse that was born from her would be born infected with this virus. And this would pass down generations. And what he also noticed was that cancer, or lymphomatosis and other cancers would start, and tumors would skyrocket, would start to rise. And he eventually realized that this could be raised all the way to 50%. And he doesn't say it in his Rockefeller papers, probably because they told him not to, but he says it in a paper that was in German in 1941 when he was looking at this. And he was saying how, when I was at the Rockefeller Institute, I noticed this rise in cancer, even though he says nothing of it in those earlier papers. Like I said, they probably told him, don't say that. But he watched this, and it mirrored Lyme disease a lot, and it looks like he weaponized Lyme disease with this with LCM, or first he weaponized foot and mouth disease with LCM, and it kind of became like this chimeric virus of foot and mouth disease, LCM virus, and I think he took that and weaponized the Lyme spirochetes with that, and also adapting it to different animals using these viruses as well. But it's basically produces the same slow chronic disease that you see in Lyme disease. And he was looking at this his entire life. This was like the main pathogen that he wanted to study. The main virus that he wanted to study was this LCM virus. And so He basically explained the entire science of these incapacitating agents with that LCM virus. And that became like the model. And actually, one more thing is that this LCM virus is also a very good animal model of the Epstein-Barr virus and the human herpes virus 6. So there's eight herpes viruses that most people that are common. You don't have them all, but a lot of people have Epstein-Barr virus. A lot of people have human herpes virus 6 in latent form. A lot of people have herpes simplex in latent form. And those are common ones, but when they're reactivated, they're both neurotropic and oncogenic. They have high potential to cause cancer. So that his study of LCM also applies to Epstein-Barr virus, like it was kind of like his animal model of Epstein-Barr virus.
So with his lifetime directed of study of the LCM virus, we can see an intention to suppress the immune system and thereby let open the Pandora's box of all the viruses that are latent and not doing any harm suddenly can become virulent and cause you to get cancer.
Yeah, and those human herpes viruses was like the basis of the entire special virus cancer program. Like the study of those was the entire basis for that. And so Lyme disease also sets off these latent viruses like Epstein-Barr virus. So yes, it's still a spirochete. You get the spirochete, and within the first 2 weeks, it suppresses the immune system. The spirochetes go to the brain, but then it also activates all of those latent viruses like Epstein-Barr virus, human herpes virus 6, herpes simplex, and those are all neurotropic too. So it's a nasty combination. But that LCM virus was like the study of almost like Epstein-Barr virus, because when you get the Lyme disease spirochete and it reactivates those viruses, most of the people have that Epstein-Barr virus, nasty co-infection. And so the spirochete too likes to go to the brain. So it's almost like delivering those toxic proteins into the brain, kind of like his intracranial inoculations into mice did to his mice. But you can't go around and inoculate people in the brain. So you have these spirochetes that naturally like to go to the brain anyway and shed these nasty proteins. So it's kind of like almost a similar analogy.
Wow.
It's very complex, and that's the thing, is it's really hard to try to explain to people, because even myself, it took me almost a year to really grasp what this whole thing was. And then when I started to study his work, and I spent years studying it, I just gained an exceptional understanding of all of this.
And you've been able to write it in really beautiful prose. I mean, it's a really, really easy read of some very difficult stuff. As you say, you can't just draw a line from point A to point B to point C, because there's also D, E, F, G, and H that are going to have to go to all these different points before you can actually wrap your arms around the whole issue. It took you years to produce this book, and I'm going to take as much time as it takes to absorb it properly with your help.
Mm-hmm.
Special Virus Cancer Program is a particular interest of mine as well. I'm sure you know Dr. Lynn Horowitz and his book, Emerging Viruses. And a lot of people have done a lot of studies and trying to make his seminal work, put it together with what you've been doing, I think would be terrific. So we're going to have to talk about the Special Virus Cancer Program hopefully soon. And you also do cover that in the later chapters of your book. So onward, and great stuff. Thank you so much once again,
Yeah.
AW Finnegan, my friend Adam. Will you come back and talk to us again soon?
As many times as you'd like to talk to me, I will come back. I'd be happy to.
Well, that's fantastic. And thanks everyone for being with us tonight. Be sure and visit thesleeperagent.com. If you have questions for Adam, address them to info@thesleeperagent.com. I thank you all very much. And I'll see you tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern time for our weekly live chat. So join us then. And thanks everyone for being with us tonight. Good night.